few weeks, we've been covering the different themes in the book. And last week, we left off with this point right here. The author, he said that there is a deeper point that makes attachment theory important to Muslims. The ultimate objective of Islam is to connect people with their Creator. Islam is about forming a bond with Allah. Now, if a person has learned not to trust their early attachment figures, how will that affect their ability to trust Allah? So, the last session we had, we were talking about attachment styles that we might have. And the question obviously comes up, the attachment style that we have with our parents, does that affect? And if so, how does that affect our relationship with Allah? And the argument being made in the book is that it absolutely does affect the way that you can then connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'll share a few things from the book, and then we will then turn to the articles that we wanted to discuss. The author, Shaykh Mikhail, he mentions a hadith here. This hadith is narrated by Al-Imam Ibn Majah in his Sunan, from the companion Sahl ibn Sa'd radiyallahu anhu, who narrates that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "Inna hadha al-khayra khaza'inu." The tanween, there's a mistake, as well as over here. That's a diptone. غير منصرف for the Arabic students. إن هذا الخير خزائن ولتلك الخزائن مفاتيح. He says, indeed, this khayr, this deen, it is a collection of treasures. وَلِتِلْكَ الْخَزَائِنِ مَفَاتِيحٌ. And these treasures, they have keys. فَطُوبَى لِعَبْدٍ جَعَلَهُ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلْ مِفْتَاحًا لِلْخَيْرِ مِغْلَاقًا لِلشَّرِّ. Glad tidings is for a person, a servant of Allah, whom Allah has made a key for good and a lock for evil. وَوَيْلٌ لِعَبْدٍ جَعَلَهُ اللَّهُ مِفْتَاحًا لِلشَّرِّ مِغْلَاقًا لِلْخَيْرِ. And woe to a slave whom Allah has made a key for evil and a lock for good. So, the question we can ask when we read this hadith is, in my life, what am I? What role am I playing? How much goodness spreads because of my efforts and because of my presence and existence in the spaces that I'm in? The believer, no matter where they go, they are a source of goodness, a source of khayr. No matter where they are, whether they're at work, whether they're with friends, whether they're with family, they're traveling somewhere, wherever they are, the believer aims to be a source of goodness and a lock for evil. And the greatest way that we can do that is through our own being. Through our own being. That includes in the relationships that we're in. So the author writes, the parents are the first key or lock to our ability to connect. Young children growing up aim to connect with those around them. The humans around them impact their ability to do so. And the parents are the first, you could say, line of responsibility. They can either be a key to open up this child's ability to connect with the people around them, or these parents can be a lock, preventing the child. So upon them lies a great responsibility and a great reward for raising children who can trust, love, and form secure attachments. This is the context in which the author mentions this hadith. It's that parents, their role is to socialize, initiate the child into the world. And many of the understandings that the child develops at that young age can persist into adulthood. And so if in adulthood a person notices certain dysfunctions, especially when it comes to trying to connect with other people, it can really help to go back and explore, wait, how did I develop a perspective on relating to other people? Like, what was the message that I took from my interactions with the people around me? Because we all took messages, whether we're conscious of that or not. Growing up, the way people treated us we often couldn't make sense of their intentionality or why they did what they did. The most obvious solution to a young child is that, well, I must be the problem, and I must not be important, and I must be the one who is causing the problems here. And so you can have problems with self-worth. You can have problems with being, dependent, desperate for attention, because that's kind of how the individual grew up. Now, the question might arise to you, wait, why are we talking about secure attachments to begin with? I thought this book was all about listening, right? Hearing and listening, so why are we talking about secure attachments? Because one of the main ways that you can help a child develop a secure attachment is by listening to them. Because listening is not just listening to words, it's affirming their being. It's affirming their importance. We might say, well, this child is just talking nonsense. Do you understand? Like when you have a lot of work to do, and your child comes to you and wants to talk about Minecraft, it's, the thought crosses your mind like, I don't have time for this. Because this is not important. In your mind, this is not important. But actually, the listening that's required is not merely due to the importance of what they're saying, but it's to affirm their being, that they are important. And that's why sometimes in our cultures, we shut down young children from speaking, especially in public settings. If they try to say something, we say, stay quiet. And no doubt, there's a way to teach them when to speak, and waiting for someone to finish before starting, not interrupting a conversation. There's etiquettes to teach, no doubt. So the idea is not to be completely permissive, but to not shut them down every single time, especially when they're younger. As they're getting older now, let's say there's a teenager who's like 14 years old, right? And he's sitting with, let's say he's sitting with his father and his father's friends. How many of y'all had to do that growing up? Your father would call you and make you sit, right? And then maybe you weren't allowed to speak. But imagine this, 14-year-old, 13-year-old tries to offer some opinion. Because maybe they read something on Al Jazeera or something, right? It just popped up in their algorithm. They're like, oh, yeah, I read something about this. They didn't read anything. They watched a TikTok. But I read something about this. And they share it. It might be nonsense. It might not be that important. But if the adults in that gathering shut it down and say, this is all nonsense, just stay quiet, what do you know? Then this teenager does not develop the confidence to speak in that setting. And it becomes very hard going forward to speak and have a voice. They'll have to actively make a strong effort to develop a voice in a public setting. And the same could be said for women. Growing up, if you're not allowed to say anything, or if anything you say is ridiculed, like what do you know, then you come to believe that I can't say anything. And you could be 25, 30 years old, and in that setting you can't say anything. And so listening, ignoring what the message is, that maybe the message is not going to be completely accurate, but let's give them a voice so that they know that they're important and that their presence and contributions are valued. That's why we're talking about secure attachments, because listening to the child is a huge part of that. Shaykh Mikhail, he quotes Ibn al-Qayyim. He says, Ibn al-Qayyim writes, listening is the foundation of the mind and the base upon which faith is built. Then he explains, he says, by saying that listening is the foundation of faith, he suggests that people's connection with Allah can be affected by how well they were listened to as well. Yeah. Because if you don't think you're important at all, in general, you just don't think that you have much value, then you're not going to think much about your worship. What's the point of worshiping? My worship, I'm not a good person to begin with. I'm not that important to begin with. My relationship with Allah, Allah's too great. Me, well, come on. Who am I? One's self-esteem affects their ability or their belief in their potential. How many of us, let's be really honest, sometimes we struggle with believing that we have the potential to have a really meaningful relationship with Allah. We struggle with that idea. Like me? No, like the pious people, yeah, like they can have a relationship with Allah, they can pray tahajjud and Quran and dhikr and all of that. Me? Man, like, I'm not really that kind of person. And I don't even have the potential. Like, in our minds, we can't see ourselves being that. And that's the first step, is to see yourself as potentially becoming that. But if there's low self-esteem and low self-worth, then, or if there's dependency and desperation, a lack of a secure sense of self, then our relationships become, let's think about it when it comes to human beings. Someone who's desperate, someone who just really needs validation from other people all the time, does not have a secure sense of self. What do their relationships end up looking like? Anyone want to share? Any characteristics of what that will look like? There's this person who's desperate for like anyone to give them attention. What do you guys think? Nobody? Yeah. They can come off as needy. So what would that look like? What are some behaviors? Yeah. Constant validation in the form of what?
That you were valued in that person's life.
Right, like asking questions, right? Like, hey, are we still friends? Like, hey, are this? Hey, what do you think about that? Hey, this, that. Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm.
A doormat where you let that person doesn't have any boundaries and they constantly let people abuse them in a way.
Yeah, that's one that, again, I have no value, so whatever it is that will get me approval from you, like I'll compromise on everything. Yeah? Yeah?
They like being sick in the sense that they like the sick role because everyone comes and gives them attention.
Okay, right. They like the role of victim in some sense, where everyone comes to them and feels bad for them. Even pity is a valid form of attention, right? Okay.
They can avoid other people, like because they do a lot of negative self-talk. They might already assume that people don't want to be around them.
Okay, yeah. What happens if they find someone who gives them attention? What's a common trait there? Cling on to them, and it becomes what then for that person? Suffocating, overwhelming, right? And then what happens when that person just pulls back a little bit, just to try to breathe? Like, no, I can't come for the 5th time today. I can't come with you somewhere. And the other person feels what? Rejected and hurt and let down. The question here is, what went wrong there? Was the individual wrong for pulling back? No. Was the other individual wrong for asking for some attention or some time? Maybe, arguably, but hey, they can ask. People can ask and make requests. But the thing is, they need to be ready for what? Potential rejection. If you have a secure sense of self and someone says they're busy, okay, then they're busy. And that's that. The issue really lies in their lack of a secure sense of self. Now, let's direct that to our relationship with Allah. Someone's desperate for help. And maybe Allah Ta'ala turns their life in a certain positive direction. And this individual gets really happy. Like, Allah's turning the tides in my favor. Amazing. And so now they're all excited, they're all happy, they're like pleased with Allah. And they're just like devoted to Allah, like God is good. Right? And then something goes wrong. What happens then? It all falls apart. It's the end of the world. God hates me. The issue is not in what happened. Ups and downs are part of everyone's lives. The issue is that this individual's relationship with Allah was very much conditional. If you give me what I want, then I am happy in this relationship. And if not, I'm going to back out. But that's an unhealthy, it's an unhealthy position to start from. And so that's what he's saying. Your connection with Allah can be affected by how well people listen to you. Deep listening is the restorer of life to a dead and closed mind. The listener is the guide whose hand we can grasp as we traverse towards Allah. Listeners shape us for the best. Because so listening is a very essential component to establishing secure attachment, responsiveness. And so listening plays a role in our attachment style. And our attachment style affects how we can trust Allah. Okay, now I want to start by discussing this article, inshallah. This is Belief in Divine Love, Discovering Spiritual Attachment Styles by Dr. Hassan Alwan and Dr. Usman Omarji. Okay, you can find this on the Yaqeen website. I'm going to summarize some of the main points of this article. The author begins, one of the things he talks about here is a hadith. He quotes a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, recorded by both Imam al-Bukhari and Imam Muslim, where he said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ يُولَدُ عَلَى الْفِطْرَةِ. No child is born but that he is upon the innate disposition. Meaning when a child is born, they're not Muslim, but they do have an inclination, a natural inclination towards belief in one God. Then, فَأَبَوَاهُ يُهَوِّدَانِهِ أَوْ يُنَصِّرَانِهِ أَوْ يُمَجِّسَانِهِ. It's his parents who make him into a Jew, a Christian, or a Zoroastrian. Okay. So when we read this hadith, what do we understand? The child comes into the world pure, and then the parents begin to influence the child and shape their religious beliefs. That's kind of the general meaning you take. So the authors, they write, one might interpret this hadith as only referring to the role that parents play in conveying a cognitive, propositional set of beliefs to their children. What does he mean by that? He means you could read this hadith and think that the parents only convey the words of religion to their children. So they tell them, this is what we as Jews believe. This is what we as Christians believe. Words. Someone might think, okay, that's what the hadith is talking about. The authors, they write, however, many parents fail to realize that they also influence the development of their children's affective, emotional experiences with Allah through their parenting practices. So, there's another narration, the same narration, a different transmission. And it says that if the parents are Muslim, then they will bring their child up as a Muslim. What does that mean? That you merely teach them La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah? That you teach them how to pray? You teach them all the kalimas? You know, all the... Growing up, how many of you had to memorize all these Arabic lines that you never knew what they meant, but you just got to memorize them? No, literally. There's a lot of us here I know that did that. We memorized just the words, and we had no idea what they meant. They're useful to know. It's good to know the Arabic of those things, beautiful, but if you don't know what they mean, they're just words. They're just sounds, to be honest. They're just words. That's not only how parents influence their children's religious experience. It's also in the associations, the positive and negative associations we make with religion. For many of us, religion was never celebrated, ever. When did you ever celebrate? The way you would celebrate for something else, some other accomplishment, would you celebrate for finishing one juz of Quran? Would there be a celebration? Yeah.
We always got cash when we memorized Quran.
Oh, mashallah, mashallah. That's not a bad thing. Alhamdulillah, I think that's nice. Or even at home, how was prayer encouraged? Was it merely just forced, go do it, and no one has any idea why? I just got to go do this yoga thing? No idea why I got to do this? No explanation for what's the meaning behind it? No concept of a relationship with Allah? Just a bunch of things I got to do? How strict were the parents when they would convey these things? Was their love conditional upon whether or not you were a good Muslim in their eyes or not? All these things impact how the child views these religious, devotions. Absolutely. How was your relationship with dressing the part, looking the part. What was that like? Was it forced upon you? Were you scrutinized and criticized for every little mishap when it came to your dress code? And these are questions to ask. And if you're just scrutinized all the time, young children, it negatively affects them too. But they're just so docile, they're just so impressionable that they don't say anything and they just go with the authority. But it's when they're in their early teen years that they begin to fight for some autonomy. And that's the age where you start to see a lot of, not rebellion. Parents frame it as rebellion. It's not rebellion. It's a natural desire for autonomy. The child's trying to make their imprint in the world. Right? They're saying, no, I'm going to have my own kind of way in the world. I'm not just a follower of someone. I have my own way to do things. And so kids will do things at that age. And that's where you start to see the impact of whether or not the upbringing was positive or negative. Positive or negative. So if I see someone who's 7 years old, for example, 6 years old, and they're really outwardly religious, to be completely honest, it's nice, mashallah, to see that, but it doesn't give me much reassurance. Because I'm well, they're 6, they're 7. If you can just control them enough, they'll do what you say. Likely. I'm really curious to see, give it 6 more years. Give it 7 more years. When they're 13, 14. I want to see the relationship then. Because at that time, your controlling tactics will not work. It will be a lot more about whether or not you were able to establish a relationship. The author goes on to write, we argue from an Islamic perspective that attachments are not simply a means to survival. See, what he presents before this in the article is that evolutionary theorists, they viewed attachment theory as a survival mechanism. Humans develop attachments to their caretakers as a means of survival. That's it. The author says no, it's not merely a means to survival. Rather, attachment to God can be conceived as the fundamental purpose of life. The human being was created to lovingly attach and voluntarily submit to, i.e., worship Allah. And the development of a secure attachment to caregivers in childhood serves as a means to facilitate a secure attachment to Allah. Because you learn to trust. You learn to be comfortable with what? With uncertainty, ambiguity. You learn what it's like. You've experienced that in the face of uncertainty, when I fell, I knew there was someone there for me. I've experienced it. It's not even theory. I've literally experienced having some adult, attachment figure, a secure base, that when I fell, I've experienced the comfort of going back to them, knowing that they're there for me. And when you've experienced that, your ability to then go forward in life and be willing to trust in the face of uncertainty is so much greater. Because it's not just a theory. You've emotionally experienced that feeling. The challenge for those who didn't experience that is when you were young, you didn't experience that trust. And so now in adulthood, it's very hard to move beyond the theory. Right? People will say, I've heard so many times in talks, in halaqas and khatiras, people are saying, just trust Allah. Take that step into the unknown and trust that Allah will take care of you. And they're I just don't know how to move past the theory. I'm just stuck. I can't do it. Well, that might have something to do with this. Right? I don't know how clear this is to you guys. Can you guys see this? It's a diagram. The authors try to present this kind of logical step-by-step way of how parental love for children affects their relationship with Allah. Number one, they start by saying Allah, who is Al-Wahhab, the one who bestows gifts, He gives the gift of a child to the parents. The child is helpless and cannot understand Allah. Then what did Allah do? To take care of this child, He created love in the heart of the parents. And now the parents show love and spend on their child. As a result, what comes about? Number one, parents are rewarded with paradise for proper nurturing and tarbiyah. On the other hand, the child internalizes parental love and trust and applies it to their image and relationship with Allah. They see the world as a safe place. They see it as a place where generally people are trustworthy. Right? Have you ever met someone who's very distrusting? Ever met someone like that? It's very hard. It can be very challenging. Why? Because you could do everything right and it's never good enough for them. Because they're always like, but what if? What if at any moment now you show your true colors? You're like, dude, it's been months. I don't know what more I can do to prove to you who I am. And it can just become very challenging in that relationship. Prior research on non-Muslims has investigated the connection between a child's upbringing and their God image and attachment. Let me clarify this concept, God image, because it's very central to both articles. God image is not a picture. Okay, guys? Like, let's not start throwing any shirk around and, labeling things. No. God image is the concept that you have in your head of who Allah is. Like, what type of being do you imagine your Lord to be? Or do you believe your Lord to be? And we're going to talk about some common God images that people have. This body of literature has found links between parental God image and youth God image. Youth attachment to parents and attachment to God. And parenting practices and youth God image. What does this mean? Parents with a loving God image are more likely to raise children who perceive both their parents and God as loving. Whereas parents who imagine God as distant have children who likely think the same. Pause for a moment. Think about the way that your parents think about Allah. How do they think about Allah? What type of things do they say? Do they talk about God's love? Do they talk about His mercy? Is that the dominant kind of tone and theme that comes up when they speak about Allah? Or is it always, Allah's going to punish? Allah will hold you accountable. Allah will throw you in the fire. Is it always Allah will not forgive? Allah is very strict. Like, what's the tone? How is religion portrayed? And because the parents, maybe they grew up with that. Really, maybe the parents grew up with that mindset in relation to God. And maybe that helped them conform. Oftentimes, let's just be very frank here, many parents will conform because whose standards are they trying to meet? The rest of their community. Right? The rest of their cultural or ethnic community. And everybody in that community, to some degree, probably believes in God and believes in Islam, and they'll have this concept about we must believe in God, we must conform to His teachings. The children, though, whose standards are they trying to meet? Oftentimes, not the cultural community, not the ethnic community. They're trying to meet the standards of their friends and their classmates and the people around them. Those standards are very different. Belief in God is not a part of that standard usually. So then you have this real problem where a belief in God that's so strict and so punishing just doesn't sit well. Why would I want to have a relationship with someone like that? But the God image of the parents is passed down to the children. And that's what a lot of us have been trying to do here at Wijhah for a long time. Is to some degree try to undo maybe the flawed God image that we have developed due to our upbringing. And it may not just be our parents. It may be the religious figures in our community, the religious teachers in our community, who also perpetuated that understanding. For many of us, it's a matter of going back to the Quran and saying, wait, this is not the Allah that I find in the Quran. The one that they're talking about? That's only like a part of the story. There's so much more. And I remember reading the ahadith, the narrations of the Prophet ﷺ, describing the mercy of Allah. And you get to a point as you read those ahadith that you're like, man, nobody can go to hell. Like the way Allah's mercy is, like, subhanallah. Whereas prior to that, I thought everybody's going to hell, like everybody. The only guy might be like, Imam in Mecca, mashallah, or in Medina or something, right? Everybody else, forget it. And subhanallah, it was just eye-opening for me. So for many of us, that's our challenge right now. The Prophet ﷺ was sent to a people with a severely distorted image of God. Through his intimate bond with his followers, he was able to help them reform their image of Allah and attach to him. Ar-Rahman sent Muhammad as a mercy to guide people to Allah's mercy. All the traits that we want to teach our children about, we have to, in the human capacity, embody those traits. I want my children to know that God is loving. In a human capacity, I need to show them love. So the concept makes sense. I need to give them trust. I need to show them that no matter if they do good, I'm there for them. They mess up, I'm there for them. That's our duty, is to pass that on. And the Prophet ﷺ showed people that. He showed people that. Even people who messed up. He was a path of redemption for people. Now look at this, subhanAllah. I think this is such a powerful point here. I think it's one of the last points, And then we'll cover the next article next week, inshallah. He says, the authors, they say, rehabilitation of people's God images will likely fail if the only strategy employed is intellectual dialogue. I'll give you an example. Imagine you have a community of youth who really don't believe that, they don't feel that Allah is merciful and loving. So what's the solution? People will say, well, let's get them together, give them a talk on the mercy of Allah and His love. Intellectual dialogue. Show them a hadith, show them all that stuff. That will change everything. No, it won't. It will help maybe a little bit, but no. The authors, they write, proper tarbiyah encompasses the nurturing of both our intellectual and emotional sides. In other words, helping those with distorted God images requires reaching them on an emotional level so they can heal from prior difficulties that contributed to their unhealthy God images. That's so important. People come to me, they say, I have a friend who really doesn't like Islam. They're Muslim, but they just don't want anything to do with Islam. And they're like, tell me something I could tell them. Intellectual dialogue. I could tell you something, but they've probably been told that their whole lives by their parents. I'm like, just show them love. They probably associate you with religion. You're probably the religious friend or something. So now you have a responsibility to, represent religion and its essence, its spirit of love, of compassion, of welcoming, a welcoming nature. And that can be so much more powerful than any other message you give. Really. The biggest predictor of success in any type of therapy is not the type of counseling theory or intervention used. Rather, it is the quality of the relationship between the therapist and client. The therapeutic alliance. That is so powerful. Just that you know someone cares for you. That's why sometimes we don't appreciate our doctors. Because they just pitch up and they're just like, yeah, what's wrong? Right? There's like no bedside skills, nothing. Yo, what's wrong? They get your allergies wrong too. Like, oh, you have an allergy to milk. I'm like, no, I don't. Who said that? You got that wrong. How's your brother? I don't have a brother. You don't know me. Right? Nothing. But imagine they walk in and they just know something about you. Hey, remember the last time you told me about this? How's that? You're like, wow. This person knows me. They remember me. They remember details. Even though it's written in their report, right? But it just stands out to them in attention. The quality of the relationship between the therapist and client. Now, Why is that relevant here? The authors, they say, we believe this equally applies in the therapeutic process undertaken by scholars and religious educators when rehabilitating their students' distorted images of God. So when you look for a teacher, what are you looking for? Someone who's really knowledgeable. Ideally, is nice. But ultimately, people benefit from those that they think or they believe care about them. Your friends will benefit from you when they're convinced that you care about them, that you've convinced them. You care. Look, I'm sure you care. Have you convinced them that you care? That's the challenge. Parents care about their children. You know, the mistake is they haven't been able to convince their children that. The children don't believe that. They don't feel that. And so that alliance between someone who's trying to influence and someone who is, who they're hoping to influence, that relationship will mediate the extent to which that influence can take place. And so that's, I think, very powerful. Inshallah, going forward, we'll talk a little bit more about specific details about parenting style and our relationship with God, inshallah. I will stop here for tonight, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.